Welcome to the Mind Your Own Business podcast and show. I am your host, Elizabeth Upton, and as a former executive, I have seen it all. Our conversations are aimed at inspiring new ways that you can redesign your business and your life so that you can create more time, freedom, and power than you ever thought possible. If you are a highly driven business professional, ranging from I have an idea to an emerging entrepreneur to a CEO who's ready to expand your team, or even if you are an employee who works for one, this show is definitely for you. Join us as we discuss strategies and tips and hacks that will help you to mind your own business, all while not taking ourselves too seriously. There's a little bit of all things business in here, designed to simplify and set your life up for success, from operations, marketing, sales, finance, and mindset to self-care. All of my guests have made an impact in my life, and hopefully they'll do the same for you. If you love to learn and are ready to level up, you're in the right place. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Mind Your Own Business podcast. I am so honored and excited to be interviewing this guest today. She is not only an author, a speaker, a resilience expert, but she is an incredible human. She is someone that I look up to. She is someone that inspires me. She's someone that I call a coach. And for her to be here with us today is so amazing. She has been on so many shows. And the fact that she's here with us today is just blowing my mind. She is the great Cheryl Hunter. Cheryl, welcome to the show.
Elizabeth, it is such a delight to be with you. Thank you.
It's amazing to have you.
How are we going to get through this without just laughing and giggling and smiling the whole time? It's such a treat.
I know, it's so wonderful to see you and be here today. And I could go on and on about all the things that you do. I don't even know how you find the time. But you're coming off right now a groundbreaking episode on Dr. Phil, where you discussed your personal story. You recently were featured in People. You have a successful podcast called Trafficked. You are really building momentum. You're educating people. You're raising awareness on human trafficking and the importance of resiliency. I mean, what else is it that you don't do? It's incredible to me. Tell us more about what it means to be a resilience expert. I've never, ever heard that before. And I think it's such an incredible way to think about things that I've never thought about before.
You know, interestingly enough, I was first named that by one of the news stations that I was doing an interview for. They were asking about my story. I was kidnapped as a teenager. I won't go into all the gory details, but I overcame. And what I recognized in the process is that we each go through the unimaginable. We each face circumstances in the course of our lives that we would never have chosen for ourselves. And it's possible to overcome. It's possible to be resilient. My business today, I help entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners get their message out to the world in the way that I've been able to do. I found that I've been very effective at getting my message out to the world, and I saw what a difference that it made for people and for me myself. And I thought, I want to help others do this. But on one of my first news appearances, I had failed to come up with my chyron, they call it, that lower third title bar that goes over your talking head when you're on the news. And they wrote victim. And I was like, oh, hell no. I do not want to be called a victim. And I say to my clients now all the time, you must brand yourself. You've got to title yourself, name yourself before somebody else does. And so when it was like Cheryl Hunter, victim, I was like, oh my God, that is the last thing in the world I'd ever want to be called. And they were like, well, what, after the break, what else? And I was like, we've got to change that right now. And they said, well, what else would you call it? How about survivor? I was like, I still don't want to be defined by that. How about triumph, resilience, overcoming, something like that. And they were like, resilience expert. I was like, I'll take it. So beats the hell out of victim.
Oh,
And it kind of stuck at that point. And I'm to your question, I'm less concerned with what a resilience expert is or does, but I'm more interested with what does it mean to be resilient for each of us. I was watching a documentary last night on trafficking, and one of the interviewees had talked about, children that go through this experience, that are abducted or are put into child trafficking. They're incredibly resilient, their bodies recover. And I thought, oh, I get that. And yet resilience is so much more than a physiological phenomenon. I spoke earlier about what does it mean to overcome. We can overcome something, and we've all experienced unexpected, unwanted circumstances. But I really look at resilience as the ability to get knocked down and get right back up again with no loss of presence and potency and power, and to do it with some velocity. And so ultimately, I look at resilience as being able to mine the gold from whatever the negative circumstance was that we went through. So like right now, COVID, for example, how do we find the gold in it, even if, we've lost our jobs or our companies or loved ones or all of the stuff that comes with being human. In one regard, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer or whatever that's called, but what's certain is we're all going to experience adversity or challenging circumstances. How can we best prepare ourselves to go from challenge to challenge with no loss of presence or purpose or power? How do we do that? And I think the time to ask that question is when we're not in the grips of the challenge itself, but ask ourselves in anticipation of it, when things seem like they're going well, what are the practices that I could put into play that will fill my tanks so that when a blow comes, it's not so debilitating. It doesn't have the power to take me off my feet for good.
I love that you bring that up, because that is something that even as a kid and even in high school, there would be these moments that bad things would happen. People would die, things that seemed horrific, that were out of the norm. And then it would be something where as a school, we would come together and we would communicate about it. And I remember feeling in that space that this was something that was out of the norm, that this was, oh gosh, bad luck. Oh, wow, that happened. And as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that that is what life is, and that we are going to experience tragedy. We are going to experience losing our loved ones. We are going to experience all of the things that, even now that COVID is bringing about, that people are losing their parents, things that as a kid, you think that you're going to just have everything around and the people around you, and that's the way that it's going to be. And if we could educate our youth, and if I would have known at a young age that, what, this is what's going to happen. These are things that are going to occur. Here are some tools that you can use. Here is a tool belt to work with, and be able to have that and realize that that's not something that's out of the norm. That's actually something that you're going to be dealing with for your entire life. And with that, on the other side is the blessing of being present with those that you love when you have them, and the awareness of that and not taking that for granted. And, I love that you bring that up, because it's not something that I feel like we really learn at a young age. As we're getting older, we do. But what are some tools that you found? I am no stranger to tragedy, as you know. I've worked through things that no one should have to deal with, as so have you. What are some of those tools that we can educate and share with others so that they can, again, be ultimately present with the people they love and tell them that they love them?
Such a good question, Elizabeth. For years, the work that I did was helping people overcome today's impact of yesterday's trauma. And one of the things that I would ask my clients to do is create what I would call a proven practices list, practices that you can do that are tank fillers, so that I find so often why we get knocked down and can't get back up again is we were already operating on empty. Our tanks were already empty. And this is not a distinctly feminine trait, but it seems a lot. I would hear this from female clients, but they weren't just operating with their tanks on empty. They were operating below empty, doing things like, oh, I forgot to eat today.
All the time.
I haven't gone to the bathroom yet. What? I have had to go for 3 hours. Can I take a minute? Good God. There's like crazy things we do when we're oriented around caring for other people. It's not that, again, it's a distinctly female trait, but I see so many people don't take care of their basic needs, let alone self-care, whatever in the heck that is, right?
Right.
So if you come up with proven practices, and a caveat to that, what I mean by a proven practice is it's proven to you by you that this works to pull you to fill your tanks and pull you out of a slump if you're in one. But not all proven practices work all the time. So I would recommend that people would have at least 10, ideally 25, where it's like, if I every day think about something I'm grateful for, or go on a walk, or tell the people in my life that I love them. If I spend time petting my dog, or reading every morning, or journaling, or I eat breakfast, or I go to the bathroom. Okay, I take that one off the list. That just is plain old self-care, right? But come up with a list. It's a very subjective phenomenon, and what works for you might not work for me, and vice versa. But if we take some time to come up with these proven practices and then do them daily, we're far less apt to be knocked down and not get up again. And that's where the real game, that's what it really comes down to in terms of resilience. If we get knocked down is a myth. I think the only people that don't ever get knocked down aren't playing any big game in life. It's like, okay, you either have zero relationships with other humans, or you don't do anything. In other words, it's inevitable. And if we can look at life, like you'd said, from the perspective of challenge and adversity is inevitable, kind of like death and taxes being the only certainty. And this, not that it's a negative slant on life, but I think what's more negative, or sets us up for failure in a much larger way, is to pretend that we can skate through life without it. After being kidnapped for trafficking as a teenager, I used to pray every day that my day, and therefore my life, would be uneventful from here on out. Please, please give me an uneventful day. Like, let there be no challenge. But it finally hit me one day that the uneventful life that I was praying to lead was beneath who I had become in the process of having a very eventful life. And then I no longer choose to lead an uneventful life.
Yeah. I'm getting choked up by that, because I similarly had an experience when my dad was killed, and most people don't know that story yet, and I will share it at a certain point. But I gave up on loving people. I gave up on letting new people into my life, because I was scared that I would lose them. And I was scared that I would have to go through the pain of losing them again. And therefore, I didn't want to let anybody else into my life. And I saw it as, if I do or the people that are already in my life, I'm screwed. because I already love them. So they're in, and there's nothing I can do about that. But what I can control is letting new people into my life. And boy, what a place of closed down, shut heart, non-present. I mean, the impact of that is I could sit here and listen and, oh yeah, that's great, and not care. And that couldn't be further from my natural state of who I am. It couldn't be further from what I'm here on this planet to do. And yet that pain was so much that I shut everything down. And I completely understand that what you're sharing through the lens of the tragedy that I went through and the lens of how that completely shut down every part of who I am. And thank God was able to regain, and I guess can use the word be resilient to get through, to be able to be on the other side of it. But wow.
Yes. What a beautiful transformation. I don't know how else to call that you led yourself through. It's really extraordinary.
Well, it's of that level of support and having team and people around you and being willing to do the hard work and face the hard things and show up for yourself and, pass that initial level of grief, being able to say, you know what, I'm going to ask for help. And in asking for help, then the team and the people show up, and the courage to do the work and the courage to say, I'm going to hope again. I'm going to hope that I can get through this again. I wondered if I would ever laugh again. I actually asked myself, is there ever going to be a day that I'll be able to laugh? And it shows how important it is to not be alone and to have support and to ask for help. And, you have come into my life, and the team that you have created has been another level of showing me that level of support, and that we can get through, and we will, because what we're doing in our lives can impact and help others. And that is what drives me. That is what I hear and feel from you is you're someone that you're in the media, you've done all these appearances, you are an incredible human, as I like to call you, and you could only do that. You don't have to help other people. You don't have to take your time. You don't have to, coach me or work with people, but you do. And I'm wondering, first of all, as I said in the beginning, I don't know how you find the time. And second of all, what is it that drives you to help other people? Because you could be doing what you're doing and be just fine.
I can't not. Now, a couple things about that. As a girl, I grew up as a cowgirl in the mountains of Colorado in a super remote place. And I used to go out in the meadow and lie on my back in the cow meadow and look up and see planes flying by and think, oh, I just want to be the girl sitting in the plane, looking down at the girl lying among the horses and the cow patties and stuff in the field. I want to be her. Well, to do that, I'd have to do something. I'd have to help people. I really want to help people. And I think that need is at the core of the experience of being human. Now, I'm fortunate enough now that literally thousands of people reach out a month because that's what they want. I want to help people by X. And sometimes it's they've lived through something and they want to give away what they've learned to people. Maybe they've created a book or a service or a product or something based upon that. And sometimes it's that they have a business that's designed to help people shortcut or overcome, or a revolutionary way to, like a better mousetrap. But whatever it is, the people that we speak to all the time are just here to help people. But before that, I always wanted to. I had no idea what I could do. Would I teach people how to train horses? I mean, I was okay at that. Is there a demand for that? I just didn't know as a kid. But then life gave me what it gave me. And I was thinking, how do I don't want this crap. I wanted to help people. I I don't want to feel screwed up in the head for the rest of my life. I just want to help people. And in the process of trying to not feel so screwed up in the head, I started volunteering. I realized, I'm not the first person to go through adversity, through challenge, through the unthinkable. And I thought, I'm going to find people who've also gone through it way worse than I, and see what they know. And I started, this happened when I was a teenager. I started volunteering at old age homes because I was thinking, well, my mom at one point, I never told anybody what had happened, but I just said to my mom, I feel so depressed. I feel so depressed. And she goes, do you mean bored? And I was, no, not bored. I mean depressed. And so she goes, well, because I never said what had happened. I didn't want anybody to know. I felt filthy and used up and ruined. And she said, well, why don't you find someone to help? There's got to be someone worse off than you. Find them. And I thought, well, who's worse than me? I'm like, I've got no future. I feel screwed up in the head. And I thought, oh, old, no future, and screwed up in the head. I'll go to them. And so I started volunteering at old age homes, and there were a lot of them in that era that had gone through the Holocaust, and some did beautifully, and some understandably were hardened. And I wanted to figure out why. And I started interviewing them. They loved to be able to talk. And then, war vets and ultimately 9/11 first responders, and trying to find out why some people overcame and others didn't. But then once I learned, I codified what they'd learned and what was helping me. And I started teaching that. And I could see it was making a difference for people to tell them what I had learned. And as I started finally deciding to tell my own story many years later, I saw that had really impacted people. They could see, well, I went through something challenging and I can overcome if you could. So, okay. But what I recognized on a bigger scale was that there were so many more like me. I mean, probably millions, everybody who wanted to help people, who's got a message in their heart and some way that they do help, but they don't know how to let people know they exist. And by virtue of the fact that I was doing the news appearances and the TED Talks and writing the books and doing all this stuff, being on TV, people were finding out what I did. And I thought, why don't I teach people how to do what I've done and get their message out to the world, get out in front of people? So you ask why I help people, because I think that's what we're born to do. But I tell you, Elizabeth, every time I stop focusing on, my own nattery chatter in my head about whatever, like naturally is there all the time as a human being, and start making my life about somebody else, life feels great. It takes away every bad thing I've ever gone through. It makes it all, in fact, worth it. It's not that I want to endure it again, but if I had to choose, absolutely, because it gives me the life that I have now. And I think we're all built that way because we want to make life better for those we love, for those we don't even know. Don't you find that's the human experience?
Absolutely. I lost a very dear friend. It reminds me, when he passed, I was about 21. I was in college, and it was one of my first experiences with really losing somebody that was super close. And I was grieving, and there was a course that I was taking, and it was about medical ethics in the emergency room, and how you decide these split second moments that have to do with people's lives, and looking through case studies and da 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 da. So ultimately, the teacher was a doctor, right? And so he told me, he said, I want you to come into the emergency room and I want you to do a shift. And I want you to have that be, part of your grief. And I think it'll be important for you to get your mind off of this and do a shift. And he couldn't have been more right. I came into the emergency room. It was in Sacramento. I went to school at UC Davis, and I did probably like an 8 to 10 hour shift, and helping the people that came in that night was one of the best things that I could have done for myself, because it was not about me at all. And it had everything to do with how I could help them, how I could support them, what I could do in that moment that could help them out. And it was an incredible eye opener. And it took me outside of myself, outside of my situation and my circumstance and my pain. And it had me really, really being there. And talk about being present. I mean, when someone comes in and they're just completely demolished, you are present with that person and you're holding their hand and you're doing everything you can so that they know that they're going to be okay. And in that reflection of they're going to be okay, you are also getting that you are going to be okay. And it's this reciprocity that is like a lifeblood, I guess you could say, no pun intended, where it's just like, how can I help? How can I give? How can I support? And it reminds me of that, what you're saying, because it wasn't what you would think someone would say. Oh, well, you need to come do a shift in the ER.
But how transformative. What a profound experience. I think the cause of suffering so much is that we turn inward. This is from having worked with thousands of survivors of all kinds of things. But I think when we turn inward, it tends to isolate us. We make it about us. And it's that ability to turn outward, like you did in the ER that night. It shifts our perspective. It shifts our focus. It shifts our experience of being alive, which then gives enough objectivity from our own grief, our own sadness, our own experience to start to find breathing room. When I was first at the old age homes, so to speak, I felt like the voices in my head were screaming loudly. And what I mean by that is, that as they said in Gestalt therapy, coined the phrase internal dialogue back in the 1930s, but to mean all that negative self chatter that we have. And I kept saying to myself, how could you have gone with those men? You're so stupid. Everybody knows how stupid you are. Don't tell anybody, just like it never stopped. And the great thing about going and being with the oldies, as I would call them at the time, and with all love and respect, but as I would go chat with the oldies, nobody would listen to them. And so I would sit down and talk to them, and they were so overjoyed that they would just go rattle on for hours about everything. And it was the only reprieve I could get from that voice in my head. But it gave me enough breathing room that I could start to heal, because it was about them and not about me, just like you pointed to.
I love that you talk about the voice in your head, because we don't do that very often. And if we really pay attention to that voice, it's quite loud, badgering, ridiculous, hypocritical, like everything. Like it doesn't make any sense. It's like the 3-year-old child that's in your head that actually makes no sense. And I think being aware of that voice and being able to say, got it, let's put that aside for a second, or okay, heard ya, moving on, and being able to have an awareness about it, which I think that I didn't have an awareness about it for a very long time, until I really shut up and listened and got, whoa, that's what's going on in my head. And people talk about mindset. I think that it's thrown around in a very general term. It has somewhat of a connotation like self-work mindset, like, and I learned from working with you in particular the importance of mindset, and you created a distinction for me that I hadn't thought about in the way of, oh, it's mindset. I never thought of it that way. And there is a transformation in being aware of the mindset, of being aware of the voice in your head, and then what you do with it. And it creates, I've experienced what I've committed to by getting outside of myself. How people say, I had to get out of my own way. It's
Right.
like, it's like that. It's like I got out of my own way, because if we let that voice in our head dictate what we decide to do, we probably would never do anything. And being able to say, got it, moving on, and having the team that is there to support you and to say, you know what, that's not true. That's not true. Let me actually show you what's true. This is what's going on. This is what you're up to. This is what you're creating. And knowing that that mindset and that voice in your head is something that will either stop you or propel you into action that will make an impact in the world. And having that consistently be the case, that is what you have given me the gift of. And I'd love for our listeners to hear your thoughts on, mindset or the voice in your head, or anything that they can do to really get that it's not just this general thing or this self-help book. It's actually your life that is at stake, and the life of others that you're going to help, support, influence, teach, educate, fill in the blank.
Well, absolutely. My pleasure. As I had gone, in the work that I did, helping people overcome trauma, and that work that I did, like I'd said, with the Holocaust survivors, war vets, 9/11 first responders, et cetera, that I did in codifying what had worked and not worked for them, and then in my applying that to my own journey and what worked and didn't work there, was some of the stuff that I found that was the most debilitating. I went back to when they were coming up with this whole notion of the internal dialogue in Gestalt therapy in the 1930s, but about what is that. I started studying brain science, and where does that come from? What is the impact on our lives? And I really broke down that there are two worlds, as we used to say in my overcoming trauma program, Break Free formula. We're either in survival at any moment. We'd say it was a black and white world. You're either in survival and you're being a human animal, or your best self, your human spirit. And there's, from a physiological standpoint, there's the parts of the brain that we were correlating to being the human animal. And it's the brainstem, pons, medulla oblongata, amygdala, all those primitive parts of the brain that want nothing more than the survival of the species, that there's that the organism is alive and it can procreate. Now, the paradox is these parts of the brain don't give a damn about aliveness, which comes from the frontal cortices and when these later parts of the brain that were laid on top of the brainstem. And how we would distinguish it in our program is you're either in your head, meaning like the whole survival brain world, or you're in your heart, your human spirit. You are what's possible and potential for the being of a human being. And we'd say, if you're, rattling around in your head, like all that negative conversation that's there, that's just correlated to your survival. And it will kill off all aliveness in favor of the organism surviving. So what it'll look like is attacking everything and everyone, including your own self and self-expression, versus that human spirit is all about aliveness and joy and play and whatever your qualities are that you like. But how we started teaching mindset is which thoughts, which actions, which feelings, which practices are consistent with which, and where do you want to live? In human animal or human spirit, in survival or in your best self? And so then it's up to us, it's incumbent upon us to come up with practices to keep us in our best self, to keep us living consistent with human spirit. Now, part of that is like things like the proven practice list, or like you just said, disproving negative beliefs and just then instantly creating new ones, and not getting wrapped up in the pathology of, well, where did that belief begin? How old was I? And going down the path of this, getting wrapped up in the pathology of it. Who cares? You've got a negative belief now. Let's destroy it, prove that that's not the empirical truth, but rather one possible interpretation of the occurrences or the circumstances. And now let's build a new belief just because you said so, and because human spirit can do that. Now, when you and I work together, we take it to another degree with mindset and say there's a particular kind of mindset necessary in order to be seen by the world and heard by the world. And it's an ever expansive kind of mindset. So if you are having a negative conversation with yourself, like, oh God, what am I doing? What am I saying? Well, that's not a place that can get you seen by the world. It's standing behind who you are and owning who you are, and owning the contribution that you want to be, and that you in fact already are, by simply wanting to make a positive impact on other people. And that's good enough. So stand there. I think mindset is a verb, kind of like love. It's not a noun. It's a verb. You're either doing it or you're not. And then you'll have the experience, the feelings, ultimately the outcomes that are consistent with whatever it is that you are doing.
Where can they begin, either on their own, or is there some sort of exercises?
So I've got CherylHunter.com/masterclass. I've got a masterclass that lays out a ton of value on how you can grab the attention of the media. And then on a similar note, I've got a free Facebook group. You can just search it on Facebook, Grab Media Attention. It shows you how to, I do Facebook Live videos, I do Q&A videos, we have clients step in, the team and I step in to that group. There's a free resource. I'm happy. I've got amazing team members that we do strategy sessions, and I can do that with you. And I'll give you that link as well, Elizabeth. But those are some of the ways that we can provide value for you. And if ultimately it's the right fit to work together, starting down the path of watching the masterclass will point you to what to do if you feel like becoming a client is the right thing too. So there's either the free resources of the masterclass on its own and the Grab Media Attention Facebook group, or there's the possibility of becoming a client if we find that there's a mutual fit there.
Thank you so much for being here, for spending your time with us. And gosh, thank you so much. That was an incredible interview. And this is Elizabeth Upton signing off and reminding you all to mind your own business. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope that you got a lot out of what we talked about today. If you are watching from YouTube, then please give the video a big thumbs up if you did. Make sure to hit subscribe down below if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. If you are listening from Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, because we know that there's a lot, please take a minute to subscribe if you haven't, and give us a review. It helps others to find the show, and it puts wind in our sails, literally. So please, please do that. We are at MYOB Podcast on Instagram, and I am at Elizabeth Upton Coaching on Instagram. If you are interested in following along there, we offer a lot of bonus material. And there is a link to the show notes down below in the description box, along with the resources we discussed in today's episode. Most of all, thank you for honoring yourself. Thank you for investing your time with us today. No one is going to be more of a champion for your growth than you are. So always remember that. Keep showing up. And this is Elizabeth Upton signing off and reminding you to always mind your own business.